It all began in 2007. Greg Hargrove and Jules Watsham, both former members of Iguana Entertainment, would work together to form Renegade Kid, their own independent gaming studio. They both would incorporate their expertise in N64 game development into their projects, many of which were aimed for the Nintendo DS. And while Renegade Kid developed less than 20 games during their 9-year lifespan, they obviously knew what they were doing, developing games like Mutant Mudds, Exeo-Drifter, Moon Chronicles, and several prototypes that were extremely impressive for the hardware they were running on. But there were two games that stood out from the rest. These two games were known for their creepy atmosphere, its lo-fi horror, its first-person shooter mechanics, and its mature rating. And that was Renegade Kid's Dementium games. Horror games were few and far between on the Nintendo DS, and while there were a few of them, none of them ever quite attempted to pull off what Dementium did. Dementium started off as actually being a Silent Hill pitch, which Renegade Kid made to Konami. To which Konami told them to go screw themselves. The project would then become its own original IP, originally just going by the name of The Ward, before later being changed to Dementium. Oops. So without further ado, let's jump into this review.
Prepare for phase 1 of the operation. Mr. Redmore.
Are you pooping your pants yet?
Alright, let's start with the first game. The first Dementium is the better known of the two, and was Renegade Kid's first game actually. Rated M for
massive nipples.
Play the game as William, a man with amnesia who wakes up in an abandoned hospital, which you quickly discover is full of spooky monsters. After finding a notebook and a flashlight, our journey through this twisted hospital begins. In case you've never played a first-person shooter on a DS before, you use the stylus to look around and D buttons to move. It may sound a little weird, but it actually works really well. Far better than any PSP shooter did. Anyway, as we begin traversing this hospital, we'll quickly discover that the exit is padlocked shut, forcing us to have to progress down a different path. Soon after this, we'll end up finding our first weapon, which is a nightstick baton. The first Dementium is broken up across 16 chapters, and the game takes roughly 2.5 hours to complete. In terms of mechanics, the game feels like an odd blend between Doom 3 and the Silent Hill franchise. One aspect that Dementium really nails is its sense of isolation and horror, from the creepy sounds of the hospital to the slow piano melody to the sound cues of nearby monsters all add to an eerie experience. It doesn't help that you can only hold one item in your hand at a time, which means you will lose your source of light during any gunfights during the game. Speaking of weapons, you'll amass a small arsenal of weapons throughout the game. There's the melee baton, which absolutely sucks. A simple pistol which you pick up off a dead guy. A shotgun that is the strongest semi-automatic weapon. A bone saw which sounds like a dentist drill. A wind-up machine gun, a revolver, and a sniper rifle. The gunplay feels pretty decent, and trust me when I say, you'll need all of these, as the ward is full of dangerous monstrosities. First off, we have the chest mods, which are dangerous zombie-like creatures. Then we also have skitters and swarmers, which are two different bug types that are drawn to light, as well as these weird little worm creatures called molluscas. Then there's banshees, which are floating, screaming heads, which are extremely annoying.
Shut up, bitch!
After that, there's the crawlers, which are... I don't really know what these are. Dementium has a good balance between its gameplay and its exploration. There are also a handful of puzzles to Dementium to solve, and while they're usually fairly simple, they do kind of add an interesting element to the game. And then finally, there are the bosses. The first boss of the game is the Cleaver, an enemy with a blade for one hand and a syringe for the other. The second boss is the Wheelchair Gunman.
Ah no, it's a vegetable!
Booyah.
Damn.
The other two bosses are a green room full of mollusca creatures and the Doctor himself, which is probably the hardest boss fight in the game, and the one responsible for this whole mess. Dementium the Ward is truly an impressive game, especially in terms of mechanics, but it has some serious issues with it as well. Like I mentioned earlier, the game is made up of 16 chapters, but Dementium really starts falling apart from the chapter 8 onward, with the level design taking a notable nosedive. There's also a couple of bad mechanics within the game, such as only being able to save your progress per chapter, as well as the map mechanic, where in every chapter of Dementium you'll have to find a new map for that floor. There's also the issue of enemies respawning whenever you exit a room, but the ammo and health doesn't, which makes backtracking an absolute pain in the butt. During the last 8 chapters, the game also reuses 2 of the boss fights, that being the cleaver and the vegetable boss fight. While doing some research on Dementium, I did learn that some of the content was shortened and cut due to time constraints. That might explain why the later half of the game feels so rushed. The last part of Dementium the Ward I want to talk about is its story.
Welcome to the Cum Zone.
The story of Dementium the Ward is kind of convoluted. Prior to the events of the game, William Redmore was married to a woman named Elizabeth and had a single daughter named Amanda, until one evening when police were called to the Redmore's household where William was found standing over his wife's dead body. Police shot and injured him, where he was then taken to Redmore Hospital, where he, along with several other patients, would be experimented on by the doctor and his subordinates. There are notes scattered around the first level, which gives us some context into the other patients here at this institute, all of them suffering from some form of a mental disorder. In the office where you find the bone saw, you also can find some notes written by one of the doctor's colleagues. And you know, honestly, the first Dementium doesn't really give us much more information than this. You were a guy who was falsely accused of killing his wife, only to be sent to a psych ward where you would then be experimented on by the crazy doctor, and the whole game took place in your head while in surgery. And this would be a cliffhanger ending we would be left with until its sequel came out.